Okay, so welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for June 5th, 2019. We'll follow the agenda as per the issue in the repo, which is issue number 714. Start out with, does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the issues tagged in the repos. The first one is Node.js/Node number 27508, which is use C groups to get memory limits. I'll open that one up. Is anybody on the call the one who tagged it by any chance?
Nikita.
So Nikita, do you want to talk to that one?
Yes, I tagged that because there was a disagreement about whether it should be matched at this point or not. Actually, there is some progress going on in libuv repo about that, and I think that the situation would most likely change over a week, so perhaps we can just postpone that for a week.
Okay, so basically there's discussion continuing in the repo. I'm just going to take some notes. Discussion.
I was against mentioning it in the current state because it supports only C groups version 1, which are deprecated, and does not support C groups version 2 at the moment. But there is already a pull request by the same author that was opened just, I think, yesterday. That is bringing C groups version 2 support, and that is happening in the libuv repo.
Okay, so and then this basically, I guess, what I'm guessing is if that lands, then you'll be okay with it.
Yes. If that lands, I will be okay.
Support.
Overall, this looks good. I'm just concerned about adding support for only C groups version 1 without support for C groups version 2.
Okay. Okay, so just took a quick note there. So that's good. And anybody else want to comment or say anything on that one before we move on? Okay, if not, the next one is 26418, which is refactor buffer benchmarks. Let's just see quickly. Anybody?
Sam would be the one to talk about that at this point.
Okay. Sorry, did you say you were or who was?
I said Sam.
Sam. Okay, Sam, do you want to chime in on that one?
No. Really? Yeah, I don't know what to say. I mean, I don't think voting for. I don't think we should override concerns by voting on them. Personally, I wouldn't like to see that become a common practice. Talked to Ruben over at the Collab Summit, though, and he pointed out that I haven't been in the JC very long, and I'm not paying a lot of attention to these things, but voting is not something we commonly do. It's a pretty uncommon situation. So if it's not going to become our regular pattern, and a couple people, don't respond to a PR and suddenly there's a vote and it gets slammed in anyhow, then I don't have any problems with what's going on.
Okay, so the alternative, so we have a couple of options here. There's basically three ways to approach this, I think. One is to just, let it play itself out. It's probably at an impasse. PR eventually gets closed. Another is Ruben could be inclined to invoke the please explain your objection, and then if Brian, well that already happened and Brian responded, so he can't really do that, I guess. But we have this sort of escape hatch where if someone is blocking a PR but doesn't explain when asked details, then we can just keep going. And then the third option is to vote. So I mean, actually, and then a fourth option is to try to facilitate discussion. And I guess, do you have a feeling on what the most appropriate course of action at this point is? I can recap those quickly again if you'd like. But basically, it's leave it alone, or get involved to try to like work something out between the parties.
Do you mean you as in personally?
Let's say you as in the TSC.
I have a question about the PR. My understanding is that that the PR seeks not to remove tracking for any sort of performance characteristics, right? It seeks to reduce duplication in the things we benchmark. So if the PR accomplishes that, then we do not lose track of performance characteristics in any way, right? And yet we shorten the runtime of that particular benchmark or set of benchmarks.
But I think Brian's argument is that that's not what the PR does. The PR does throw out relevant benchmarks, or we cannot know that the PR isn't throwing out relevant benchmarks. Hopefully I'm not misrepresenting Brian.
Right.
Yeah, to add on to that though, Ruben put a fair amount of time into going kind of line by line, not exactly line by line, but case by case, and commenting with kind of hidden comments, expand them to explain, okay, this is why this is why this is why this. And Brian has not yet come back to describe what specific changes in the fairly large PR he has difficulty with. I assume that he doesn't object to everything, but I don't know exactly what he does object to. So if it comes to a vote right now, it'll probably just get merged.
If he doesn't respond at all, it doesn't need to come to a vote. But go ahead, James.
Yeah, I was going to say that. If he doesn't respond to that, then I think that falls under the kind of unanswered objection clause, and it can go ahead anyway.
Yeah, I would be inclined to give him a generous amount of time to respond, though. Like at least
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
and I guess like I mean I see a lot of abstentions, and I think part of it is that it's like looking at this one on its own is a bit difficult. It's more that there's a philosophical choice that we need to make here, which is around like, do we actually say that the default has to be less than a particular limit to make it practical to run? So if we actually had, some documented policy that says, no one section can be more than an hour, and then a PR was bringing it in, it might make the decision easier.
Another possible angle here is for us to just create a second class of benchmarks, which is essentially like our normal tests, right? Benchmarks that we know take a very long time to run, just separate it out and not run by default when we do the benchmark runs.
Yeah, I'd suggest a quick.
Yeah,
and I'd be okay with the quick being the default, which is.
So another option might be just rather than this one big PR to crunch down the benchmark runtime is individual PRs for each file, and be easier to review and easier to determine how likely is it that this change will, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, this sounds like we have options, and it sounds like there's nothing that the TSC needs to do in this particular moment other than leave it on the agenda for next week in case it completely stalls out or an impasse is arrived at.
Right.
Let's give it a deadline instead of just leaving it open-ended.
Well, if there's an impasse next week, I would recommend either a vote or a decision to just close it.
Okay.
Yeah, or maybe replace it with a series of smaller PRs. I think that's a good idea, because then we can sort of distill the objectionable portion, because I think a lot of those are independent from one another, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I
mean, is this what drives the urgency on this?
There's no urgency. It's just
right. So like in that context, it's like if we get into the state where there's an objection, but the person who's objecting isn't actually interacting, then I agree, like we sort of fall into that category. As long as it's going back and forth, I'm not sure saying next week is a deadline, at least in my mind, right? Because there's nothing that drives us saying we have to get this in.
The only time where we need to have a vote is if there is literally an impasse where both sides feel like they've made their case and neither one sees the other one's side, nobody agrees, and they both agree that there's not really a lot of room for compromise. They're not going to agree, and that's the time to vote. And I'm okay if this conversation, you know, goes back and forth for weeks. Like it, you know, I mean, just as long as it's actually happening. And if it
Yep.
stops happening, then it's time to either, you know, if Ruben stops participating, it's time to close the PR. If Brian stops participating, it's time to land the PR. Unless someone else is objecting or agreeing with Brian, then they can step in and participate. But you know, it had stalled out completely. And conversation seems to be restarted. It's not going super active conversation back and forth, but it is happening, and it's probably worth giving it another week at least.
And let's also not forget. Maybe I'm sort of oversimplifying this, but suppose we land the PR, and as a result, we lose track of an important metric, and we accidentally introduce a regression, right? That's still not the end of the world. We can always fix it as soon as we're aware of it. You know, it's not like we're shooting ourselves in the foot fatally. You know, if we
Right, and
land
we're not killing end users. You know, we're not
exactly.
You know, killing's not the right word. I mean, we're not significantly hurting end users' functionality.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, especially since I think the reality is these run for so long that very few people run them anyway, right? So that's where, like,
We're unlikely to catch what you're looking for.
I that's why I was just sort of thinking that if we may get, you know, say this one lands and there'll be the next one, and we may get into the same thing. So it's almost like we need to figure out the meta issue of how do we solve the fact that they're too long running, and can we get consensus on what you do in that trade-off between less coverage and running in a reasonable time, right?
I'm kind of okay winging it. Like, you know, we're always going to be adding more benchmarks. There's always going to be benchmarks being added. It's just the fact of life. And we almost never take them out, you know, except when like an API, you know, a breaking change happens that makes a particular benchmark irrelevant because that API doesn't exist anymore or something like that. But we almost never take benchmarks out. And I don't know, I'm okay as benchmarks create over time, and then every once in a while, someone motivated like Ruben comes along and cleans up. Like
I'm actually
okay with that
too, but I'm thinking it would be nice to support people like that, to give them some basis for, you know, it'd be easier if you could say, we've agreed on this approach, and therefore I'm just doing this in line with that approach. But
I guess what I wouldn't want like, we've decided our benchmark should never take more than 120 minutes, like, you know, come up with like a specific metric, because, you know, that's going to change depending on what machine you're running on, you know, as we add more APIs, blah, 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 you know, like there has to be something. I don't know what it would look like is the thing.
Yeah, I mean, it could be as generic as, you know, we want them to be runnable as a whole, like reasonably by people. I don't know how you don't set a, like, what is that? Like, if it takes 2 days, is it still good, or?
So there's a benchmarking working group. Is this relevant to them, or is this one of those cases where benchmark means one thing here and benchmarking means something else there?
So these are micro benchmarks, and we've had a long running discussion on how we could possibly leverage these micro benchmarks to give us our overall like nightly benchmark coverage.
We mean benchmarking group?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And so the challenge has been is that they run way too long and generate way too many numbers to reasonably like show something that you can look at and say, oh, there's a problem or not.
Yeah.
Or to run them every night like we do the other ones, right? Like, so there was some discussion, and Udom was going to look at like, can we run them all once a month or something?
So I mean, maybe like some kind of like policy of what would make these usable to the benchmarking working group might be a good starting point. We can delegate this to the benchmarking folks.
Right, and so but the answer there will be something like they would need to be able to run in 6 hours or something, and, you know.
Okay. I mean, I just wouldn't want the TSC to be making that decision when there's a benchmarking working group who like actually are going to like try to use the things a lot, you know, run them all the time, you know.
Right.
Anyway, we should probably move on.
Yeah. Okay. You're right. We should move on. But yeah, I think there's still more discussion to be had. So the notes are, some discussion has restarted in thread. Let's give it another week. Okay. Moving on to the next issue then is reevaluate meetings times, which was 7:07. That's actually already been closed, and I've updated all the times so that meetings going forward after this one are scheduled in the calendar and will be scheduled. So I believe that it ends up being, well, anyway, the times are there. It's a tighter cluster. I think it's a range of 6 hours or so.
Thank you, Nikita.
Yep, thank you very much. Update the TSC charter. That one, basically, I think the status is the same as the last time. It needs to be reviewed in the next CPC meeting, which we should do hopefully on Monday, I think is the next meeting. So we'll see if we can get that done. Tracking issue for updating on the board meeting. We don't have Miles, so we won't do that. Don't have Miles. And I guess actually related to that, which maybe I should have tagged, is election for the board representative. The discussion in the issue in the admin repo was that we should open that up starting yesterday and let people self-nominate for a week. I haven't seen any comments since then, so I guess I should probably just send out some reminders to the TSC and to ComCom to do that. And then depending on who self-nominates, I think we were deferring how we would vote to see, what kind of candidates we had and so forth. But
Question on that. So in terms of the self-nominations, I assume we're posting those to the admin repo?
yeah, I would think that it might as well just be posting in the same issue that was open.
Okay.
If that works for everyone, I'm happy for other suggestions, but I was thinking we could just use the same issue. I'll send an email to both TSC and ComCom saying, based on the discussion here, we're now opening for a week for people to self-nominate in this issue. Make sense to everybody here?
Yep.
Okay. So now flipping over to the strategic initiatives. Let's pop that open. And so sorry, just opening that up. Then I gotta pull it up so I can take some notes. Guess we don't have, so I'm just gonna flip down NAPI. I don't think I have anything special to report this week. Anything come to your mind, Gabriel?
Well, we are readying an API version 5, and we've had some discussion about what to include. And I've pinged all the people who have proposed new APIs since 4, and they've all responded. And it looks like pretty much everything that's marked experimental can probably go in, but we should probably talk about it at the next meeting.
Yeah,
So
okay.
It's all nicely wrapped up in an issue that we can bring up at our next meeting.
Okay. Sounds good. Discussing, so I'm just taking a quick note, discussing what will be in NAPI version 5 will be discussed in next NAPI team meeting. Sounds good. Okay, next on the list. Just looking to see if anybody's joined. No, okay. James, quick HTTP3.
Yep. So the implementation is progressing. It's happening over in the Node.js Quick repository. The just basic Quick server and client is functioning and working on filling out the functionality. Now, I'm not focusing on any part of the HTTP3 implementation yet, as that spec is still pretty early and pretty fluid right now. My current goal is to have the PR that would add this as experimental in Node by mid to late August. There's a potential that we can get it in sooner than that, but that's the current goal. Yeah, I mean that's basically it. I am going to be giving a presentation on the current status of the implementation at NodeConf Columbia, and then a blog post coming up soon. Again, it's still very early and still very experimental, so we'll see how it goes, but making progress.
Sounds good. Rich, build resources.
So I don't have anything to report other than that I had some discussions at the summit with with some folks about what might be done. You and I should probably chat at some point, Michael. I know though that I've been busy and you've been busy. I've honestly got other priorities right now. I was going to try to like push myself forward on this stuff with the build meeting this week, but it got canceled. So, so, you know, I don't want to drop this, but it is moving slower. I have not been as engaged in it as I'd hoped. Let's talk.
Yeah, just ping me when you want to talk. I guess the other 2 cents I'll add in is there was some discussion at the Collaboratory Summit on the broader like OpenJS Foundation side of things like that in terms of build resources and.
Yeah, those are the people I was talking to. So
okay, so right, so
but by all means, air that discussion as much as you want, please.
Well, I was just saying that there was some discussion in terms of, you know, what the other projects have been getting and stuff there. So anyway, yeah, I think I'll be interested. We should get together. We can see what your impression is and go from there. Okay. So those are our strategic initiatives. And I think that brings us to the end of the agenda, unless there's anything else people want to add on. No? Okay. Well, if everybody can.
Should we read Anna's worker update that she put in the issue tracker?
Sure.
And then maybe copy paste into the minutes. Sorry to give you more work.
Oh yeah, okay. Sorry, yep. So here, I'm just copying it over. We had a session discussing the state of the workers at the Collab Summit. We discussed a number of items and decided it would make sense to go forward with moving workers out of experimental state after going through the web messaging web platform tests and making sure that our implementation aligns with them. And that's currently in progress. And adding worker using modules, example, worker pool at about 250K downloads per month to Sigim. So I will add that in as under the strategic initiative. So workers. So basically the good news is that should hopefully be going out of experimental relatively soon. And I guess the next thing would be just to discuss whether we backport that to 12. But any other comments, questions before we move on? Okay, if not, I guess we'll close for today. I'm going to stop the stream.